Stacey King has been a professional bass fishing guide for over 20 years. As a national tournament fisherman, he has qualified for the Bassmasters Classic 3 times. Stacey King is a specialist when it comes to clear water fishing. Stacey defines clear water as the water in which you can see a lure in 1 to 2 feet or more under the surface. In fishing the incredible Slug-Go and other soft plastic baits, Stacey shares the tips and techniques that make fishing these lures so deadly on bass. This video was shot over the course of several days to illustrate the variety of weather and water conditions in which soft plastic stick baits can be effective. Stacey will demonstrate not only the Slug-Go, but floating worms, lizards, and other baits which are fished in a similar manner. Springtime fishing is known as one of the best times of the year to hook big fish. Typically, the weather is varied, from bright clear to overcast skies. Water temperatures are on the rise. In this video, they range from the lower 50s to 60s over the course of 3 weeks. As the water warms, bringing bass from deep water to the banks and shallower water spawning areas, floating worms and lizards can become another effective tool in lunker hunting.
Folks, what I'm going to do right now is just take a few extra minutes and show you several of the different types of soft plastic stick baits and floating or swimming worms that are on the market. Just give you an idea of what's out there, and there's several others besides these, but these are some of the originals and some of the better ones, I think. The first one here is the original Slug-Go that Herb Reed designed. It's been about 3 years ago I first saw this bait at the Bassmasters Classic. Terry Baxay and Dave Fenton from down in Texas gave me a couple of these, and I caught several nice fish the last day of the tournament down there on it. I was real impressed with it and have been fishing them ever since. And since then, there's been quite a few more baits of this type introduced. You'll see me fishing this bait all through the video, just like that. They also make it in a smaller size. There it is right there. It's a real nice little shad imitation. Real good little bait. Another color, just to show you a different bunch of colors he has, bubblegum. It just comes in all different types. He has another little bait called a finesse fish, and it's somewhat similar to a Slug-Go, but it's got a little tail on it. It just wiggles around and darts. It's a small bait, imitates a small threadfin shad or a small minnow, and use that with a lot smaller hook on light tackle, and it really does a good job at times. Here's his weights that you insert in the bait, and I'll show you a little more about that when I'm showing you how I rig these baits. But this is a package of Herb Reed's weights, and you just slip those in the bait to get it to go down however you want it to sink. Here's Bass Pro Shop's floating lizard. Now, years ago, I was fishing floating lizards before a Slug-Go or a floating worm was ever introduced. This is something that people have been doing for years and years and years. It's just, and there's a lot of these on the market. The original one that I was fishing years ago was made by Fliptail, and which was a real good lizard. But this is one marketed by Bass Pro, and it's a lot of fun to fish. You just twitch it on top, and it really creates, you know, it draws some real aggressive strikes. They come in all different sizes and colors. Now, here's Tommy Martin's Hop-Along. It's marketed and manufactured by Kalin's Bait Company out on the West Coast, and this thing has got real neat action. It's got a big heavy tail and a light head, and boy, that thing really flashes and really does a good job. It's quite a good soft plastic stick bait. Some of the others that we have, Riverside's got this one here. It's called a Top Gun. It's a flat bait, and it really has a darting action. It darts quite a bit more than some of the other ones do. Here's the Baitmate Ultimate. This thing is biodegradable. It's got scent in it, and they say it's a real good bait. I haven't fished it much myself, but I've got a pack here and I'm going to try them. Culprit's Jerkworm. This bait is an interesting bait. It's got small ribs in the sides of it and a little tail on it, and it really has a nice action. You can get that thing in a lot of different colors. That's your pumpkin with chartreuse tail, which has been an excellent hot color the last couple of years in all types of soft plastic baits. Here's Guido's Scattershad. This is marketed by Lucky Strike Lure Companies down at Cassville, Missouri. And this is a real nice bait. It really works well. It's got good action. It's got a little old, you know, feathered tail on the end of it. It's not feathered, but I mean, it's just splitting like a tubular type tail. And it really has good action, does a good job. Guido's done a good job designing that thing. That also comes in a smaller size, which looks like a smaller bait fish, and just numbers and numbers of colors. You can just get that thing in as many colors as you can imagine. Really a nice little bait. Here's Man Shadow. I've had real good success with this bait. It's a good cold water bait to me because it really imitates a fluttering, dying shad. I like to pop this thing a couple of times with my rod tip and just let it just float back, and it sinks real slow. I fish it on about a 3/0 or a 4/0 hook, not quite as big a hook as I do some of the others. And this thing will really dart and really fall back like a dying shad. I know on the lakes I fish in southern Missouri and North Arkansas, the White River chain, we have a shad die-off in the wintertime. And if you'll watch those big dying shad, a lot of times you can see they'll just flutter, they'll pop and flutter like that, and then they'll just come back down and float down real slow, and then they may die and kick a little bit more, and then they'll fall back. And this bait real closely imitates that action, and I've just had super success in real clear water and cold water on that bait. Here's one of Tom Mann's baits. A little smaller, but the same type action. Really is a good little jerk bait. Here's Bass Pro's jerking tube. This bait right here is hollow, and it traps air, and it really does get up and dart and walk on top of the water. Almost gives you, reminds you of a Zara spook or something like that. It's a good bait to fish in grass or heavy cover because you can really pop it through the top, across the top and work it through that cover. Real nice little bait. Here's Berkeley's Power Slug. Those things are scented with the Berkeley stuff, and fish really like that stuff real well. Boy, once they grab that, they'll hold it good. Now I want to show you a few of the floating worms that I like to fish. Here's Bass Pro Shop Super Floater. This thing, boy, it's an excellent floating worm. It just stays right up on top of the water. It's soft and subtle, and it's got a real good action to it and does a good job. They got a nice selection of colors in it, and I really have good success with that. Here's Johnson's Super Floater, basically the same type thing. That's the bubblegum color that's been so hot the last few years. I think those bright colors really irritate fish that are in the spawn or the pre-spawn stage, and that's why they hit them so good. And so that's the pink one right there. Here's one of Kalen's Sidekick is what they call it. This is one that Tommy Martin helped Al Kalen design, and a lot of the pros have been having real good success with this worm right here. It's has real good action. It's a good firm bait, and he's also got a little deal here. Tommy likes to rig them with a Texas rig, more or less, and it has a little pocket for the point of the hook to come out so that you don't get hung up right there. It just covers the point. And it's been a real good bait on the tournament circuit the last few months. This worm, I'm not even sure who made this particular one. There's so many of them on the market, but this is one of my favorite colors in the springtime on Clearwater lakes. It's a yellow or a chartreuse yellow, and I've had real good success. Matter of fact, I've caught a couple of big fish today on that bait. It's just a real good color in the spring, clear water. Here's a couple of interesting baits right here. These floating worms or swimming worms are made by a fellow named Jack Huey at Mudhole Bait Company in North Carolina. And he rigs them either with hooks, a double hook model, or he has them without. You can get them either way. And I have had super success. These are 8 inches. He has a 6-inch model too, but these are 8-inch worms. You can get them in all colors, and I have caught an awful lot of fish on these big 8-inch floating worms of Jack Huey's down there at Mudhole Bait Company in North Carolina. Real good bait. And this is one worm I want to show it because it's one that I really learned to float and worm fish with. This is the old cream worm, and it's just a natural color. And I've had more success on the Clearwater Lake, seems like, on this old, just a natural earthworm colored bait than I have on most of the others put together. It's really been a good one for me, and I really like it. Each one of these soft plastic stick baits has a distinctive action of its own. This Man Shadow is a real darting bait, and it doesn't sink quite as fast as a Slug-Go does, and I can fish it up fairly close to the top and watch it all the way back if I want to, unless I really slow it down. But if I'm fishing it the way I am now, just short twitches, this thing really has a quick darting action, and a lot of times that'll trigger the strike. Now the Slug-Go is a little bit slower. It darts, but it darts farther to the side, and it's just quite a little bit different action. You'll have to get a couple of these things and experiment with them and see what the different actions on each bait are. But one day the fish may want them one day, and the next day they may want them just a little bit opposite. So I like to start off with 2 or 3 different kinds and see what we're going to come up with. There he is. That's a good fish. He really come up there and got it on top. Pretty good fish there. Really come up and got that shadow. Hello, baby. I mean, he really got up there and got it. Come here, baby. Oh, look at that. That's what this shadow and stick bait fishing's all about. See how he got that thing? Really come up and nipped it. That fish weighed about 2.5, 2 3/4. Just a real pretty, healthy, largemouth bass right there. We're going to release him back now. If you'll notice here now, I've come off a gravel spawning area and I'm coming back onto the channel swing. It seems to be that these fish are still holding on these deeper banks, and I'm moving right at the ends of them where they're getting ready to move onto this shallow gravel and build their nest. So if you can see there, we're coming right back into a deep water area, and this is where I hope to get a strike, right along in here somewhere. Really what these fish do is they live out in these deeper channels and suspend a lot of the time in the winter and late winter. As that water temperature warms and starts getting up in the all around 50 or above, they'll start to come up and then move into the banks, and then they'll start to filter down the banks onto the spawning areas. And we're trying to follow them in right here and get a few strikes near the bank, or even as they start to move towards the spawning grounds. Hopefully today the sun will come out here and maybe warm the water temperature a few degrees, and the fish will begin to get a little more active. It's a real key to have a few degrees increase in your water temperature as you fish this time of year. I don't think the actual temperature is probably as critical as the degree of change. If you've got 45-degree water and it warms to 50, your bass is going to get active that afternoon and feed some. And if it's 50 degrees and then it warms to 55, he's going to get more active yet. So I always feel like it's just a degree of change is more important than the actual temperature itself. Something to stimulate them. If you'll notice out here, I'm fishing a flat spawning type area, and there's some stumps visible under the water. They're about 3 or 4 foot deep down there on this flat. And a lot of times those fish will get right down beside those stumps, and you can throw your soft plastic bait in there and just twitch it by them and really draw some nice strikes. I had an experience in a tournament down on Lake Martin in Alabama a couple of years ago. It was in December. That was not too long after the Slug-Go had first come on the market. And I'd been catching my fish the couple of days on some other methods, and that morning I couldn't make them bite a spinnerbait and a rattle trap what I'd been catching them on. It started raining, and I heard a few guys had been catching some fish on Slug-Gos, and I put one on and started getting up in the backs of these shallow flat creeks. In the water you had about 4 or 5 foot visibility, and I'd go along and spot a big old stump on the bottom, and I'd twitch this bait by it, and I bet I caught 25 or 30 keepers that day and ended up weighing a real strong limit, which helped me to come up with a real good finish in the tournament overall. It was just a real neat way to catch them. You can really put that bait down close to that cover and fish it by it slow and tantalize them. Come on, baby, here it comes, here it comes. Oh, now I let her take it. Wow, wow, did you see that? Well, that's a nice one too. Big old stout fish. Isn't that pretty? Come here, bass. Gonna jump again, are you? Come here, fella. Come on, come on. Come on. How about it? Isn't that pretty? They will really come up and grab that thing. Getting them a little dinner there, but I fooled him and jerked him. I'm using a 14-pound test low stretch line. This is Trilene XT, and it doesn't have much stretch in it. Boy, you can really get a good hook set when they do take it. I'm gonna release him back. Grow up, bass. We're primarily fishing the back of a creek here again. We're on the channel swing just like I started earlier. The clouds are starting to break up now. The air temperature's got quite a little bit warmer, and these fish have been a lot more aggressive here in the last 45 minutes. All the water temperature's probably come up a degree or so, and the light conditions are a little better. They can see the bait a little better, and they're starting to get a little bit more active. Maybe we'll catch us another big one here in a minute. Basically what you're trying to do with these soft plastic jerk baits is imitate a dying shad. Most of your clearwater highland reservoirs are full of threadfin shad, and some gizzard shad too, and this basically just represents a dying bait fish. And it's really easy to work the bait. You can't hardly work it wrong. The main key is trying to determine the rate of retrieve and the speed you retrieve. But you're just trying to twitch that thing and make it look like an injured bait fish. Anybody can fish it. I just encourage kids and women and anybody that wants to try and catch a bass to put one of these things on a try it, because they're really easy to fish. One thing about this bait is it's primarily a sight bait. It doesn't put off a lot of vibration, and there's not a lot of noise to it most of the time, so it's primarily a reaction type bait. So it's not a real good bait in off-colored water. I'm not saying they won't bite it in off-colored water at times, but it's primarily a clear water or a clearer water type lure. Now, my definition of clear water would be an area where you can see the bait 1 to 2 or more feet away in the water. If you get down to the inches of visibility, the bass just doesn't have a big enough view to see this bait come by. But if he's got a foot or two to watch or more, then he's got a bigger area to watch, and he can see this thing as it comes by him. Got that one. Look at the size of this one. Woo, baby. Oh, gonna jump. Nope. Woo, she's a nice one. Is that the one we was looking for or what? How about that? That's what these soft plastic stick baits are all about. Had 2 of them up there on it. One of them was about half this size, was probably the male, and the other one, this is the female. She came up and took it, got it right on top. I mean, talk about aggressive. What a beautiful fish. That fish there will weigh about 6 pounds. Man, isn't she beautiful? And I mean, look at this. I want to show you how she's got that Slug-Go. Look at that down in there. Boy, I mean, she came up and got it so fast and swallowed it. Not quite into her gullet, but almost. Boy, she's got it. There. That's what it's all about right there. We're going to release her now, put her back and let her grow up. She'll spawn here in a couple weeks and make a lot of little bass. Go off, girl. How about it? She's beautiful. Let's catch another one like her. One important trick I want to show you all that I just really do a lot of the time is I dye these baits. You can get this dip and dye type stuff in the Bass Pro shops or order it through Bass Pro catalog. There's several different types of it on the market, and I really believe it can help you in certain situations to change your bait. I use the chartreuse and I use the red a lot. If you'll notice, I've taken and putting a red on this baby Slug-Go right here. One reason I use that red is because I believe that the fish key in on something red on a bait. That's something I learned when I was a little kid, and it just seems like it really does work. And the other reason is, with a little red on the head of it, I can see it myself better when I'm working it in the water. So a lot of times I'll just take a light colored bait that I'm using and dye the head of it red, or just put enough red on there so I can see it, and I think the fish keys on it better. I also use the chartreuse an awful lot too. I'll just take and change the complete color of a bait, and I'm gonna change the color of this pearl Slug-Go right here to chartreuse and just show you how this stuff works. You just dip that dude in there. I usually dip the bottom half or top, either one, whichever, dip it first. Look at that, when you pull it out there, look how that dye colors that thing. And what you do then is you just lay it out on something that you don't mind getting a little green on, and just lay it there and let it dry for a few minutes. Let that end dry, and then what you'll do is just pick up the other end and dip it in the bottle too. It's pretty dry. It just takes a second for that stuff to dry. I'll just take this in, and I'll just drop it in there and dye that. And look, I've come out with a completely different color bait. And they make this stuff in, oh gosh, 7 or 8 different colors, so you can make about any different color bait you want to. But my 2 key colors are the bright orange, or the red, and the chartreuse. There's one on a Slug-Go. Come here. That's one on that chartreuse Slug-Go there. Seems like they're kind of liking that color. He hit it pretty good, took it good. Nice little pound largemouth. I missed one on the cast before. We'll throw back out there and see if there's any more in that area right there. Those fish are coming up out of about 10 feet to hit it there. The water's pretty clear, and they're bedding a little bit deeper in this area, and they come up from deep to get that thing. I'm fishing the bait right here about a foot under the surface. Just giving it a couple of sharp snaps, popping it back and forth and let it set. And pop it a couple times and let it set. They'll just run right up there and grab it. There's one following it. Look at him, he's coming up. He flashed at it real good. There, he got it. Come right up out of that gin clear water and bit it. Look at there. This Slug-Go is one that I've dyed with the dipping dye. This originally was the color that Herb Reed calls the alewife, but I took and put it in that chartreuse dipping dye and changed the color just a little bit. Seems like they're wanting that more of a yellow or a chartreuse cast bait today. He got it good. Nice little bass. Grow up. The types of hooks I like to use on these soft plastic stick baits, there's 3 or 4 that I really like, but if we're fishing a big Slug-Go type bait, I really like the big offset wide gap hook the best. My preference probably, if I only had one hook, would be a 5/0 offset owner hook. That's what I've got in my hand right here. They're a big wide gap strong hook, extremely sharp right out of the package, and they're just stout. You just can't bend one at all. One of the other hooks I like is the Cone Cut VMC offset. Excellent quality hook, extremely sharp. Good point. Gamakatsu makes a good one. Eagle Claw, there's lots of good ones on the market, but probably my 2 favorites are the Owner and the VMC Cone Cut. The 5/0 on the big baits. On the little baits, I'll go down to the 3/0, like this one right here. And that's a VMC 3/0 right there offset. And that's what I'll use on my small Slug-Gos. And like on a shadow, I'll use a 4/0 because it's kind of an intermediate size and fits good in on that particular flat bait. One of the other types of hooks on the market for fishing a Slug-Go is this one. It's manufactured by Terry Oldham of Oldham Lures down in Wimberley, Texas. And this is a big Gamakatsu offset, but he's got this screw lock. That's a patented thing he's got. What you do is you take that screw and you just screw that screw right into the head of the bait. Just screw that down in there like so. And you get it up on there, and you can see how that's hanging right there. And then you come down and you kind of bunch your bait up just a little bit and bring that through. And then if you're fishing open water, you can leave that tip exposed like that, and you tie your line directly to the eye. Now if you're fishing heavy weeded cover, you just bring that point back up and bring it in just like that, and it's very weedless, and that'll pop right out when you go to set the hook. And so that's the way I fish that Oldham's. Okay, now I'll show you how I would do it on the standard offset. For instance, here's the Owner I've got tied right onto my rod right here. This is probably my number one favorite hook. This is the type hook that Herb Reed designed the Slug-Go to be used with. And there's a 3 reasons for that. I'll first show you how this goes on there. First, you stick that right in the head of the bait and come down about 1/4 of an inch. Bring that around like so. Wet that, it'll slide in a lot easier. Bring that around and bring that down till the eye of the hook is just barely protruding from the front of your bait. You want that eye just barely out. If you bring it on down in there, your line will tear the head of that bait up when you're jerking it around as you get a couple strikes. If you just barely leave that eye out, the line won't be tearing your bait. Then you've got this like so, and what you do is you kind of bunch that bait up just a little bit, push it forward, and bring that in the very center. You want to be sure and get that in the middle, and bring that right on through like this, just like that. Now, like I said a while ago on the other one, if you're fishing in open water, you can leave the tip exposed. And if you're fishing in cover, you can bury the tip, just barely bury it in there. And the reason that he designed a hook like this for this particular bait is because that offset, when it's set in there, that acts like a keel. And that just like a keel on a boat. And that keeps your bait from turning and rolling, and it won't twist your line. It's not nearly as bad about twisting your line if you use this style hook, because it's just balanced. He spent a couple, 3 years in designing this bait, and I think it's one of the finest ones that's been come out with yet, because it just balanced well. It doesn't roll and it stays straight. Another thing I'd like to show you right here is how to put these lead nails in the bait that Herb sells, and you can get them other places too, or just get a regular roofing nail and cut the head off it, and you can use that for a weight if you want to. But if you want to weight your soft plastic stick baits and get them down, there's a couple of ways to do it. And if you want the bait to stay down under the water and dive deeper, the best way to do it is to stick that lead in right up here. Wet it again so it slips in that plastic, insert it right behind the bend in that hook, and just shove it right down in that bait, right down in the middle. And that thing will just, that plastic will just swallow that piece of lead up. And that gives you more weight up here, and that in turn will cause that bait to dive when you jerk it, and it'll go down a little deeper, sink quicker, and also dive down that way. Now if you want your bait to come to the surface and pop up, you just use the same lead and you insert it back here in the tail. Stick it right in right there, slide that dude right up in there, and what that'll do is when you put one in the tail and you jerk on it, it'll cause the nose of your bait to come up. The tail will stay down, the nose will come up, but it'll sink faster, and you can fish it a little deeper that way. Now I've got one in the front and the back both, and that'll cause the bait to sink fairly level, and if you're wanting your bait to really get down and fish deeper, that'd be the way to do it. Put a lead up here and one back here too. A Slug-Go primarily is a 5 foot to surface bait is what I really figure they're the best for, but you can let them get down there and fish them pretty slow too, so sometimes you might want to use those leads. See him under? Good one, big one, got him. Oh baby, this is a nice one here. Look at him pull the drag. Oh, come on up here. Come on up here. That's what we've been waiting for a while now. Come here. How about that? Isn't that pretty? Now that one finally come up and took it. I've had 4 or 5 quality fish roll up on that bait in the last 5 or 10 minutes down that bank, and they just button at it with their nose. And that one, I saw him swirl it once, and then he finally come up and ate it that second time. It's about a good solid 3-pounder, probably a little heavier. Isn't she pretty? Beautiful fish. Okay, isn't she a pretty thing? Let's release her back. Grow up, baby. Here's a tip I want to show you that may save you a little bit of money. You know, when you fish a Slug-Go or any kind of soft plastic bait for a long time, the hook jerking around on it and catching 2 or 3 fish, I've caught 2 or 3 on this one, and it's torn there. You can see how that thing is opened up. So I'm going to show you how you can melt that back together and maybe get a couple more fish out of it. I'm going to have to get down here in the floor where I'm out of the wind. We're sitting out here in the middle of the lake and it's breezy, so I'm going to slip down here in the floor and I'll melt this back together with this lighter. You got to let that cool real good, because that plastic will burn you when it gets hot, or just stick it over in the water. Okay, now I've got it kind of melded back together, and I'll just stick the hook back in it here so you can see that it'll fish pretty good here for another few casts. Just run that hook back in there and right back down in. Bring her down through and up through just like you would before. And that dude's ready to fish again for a few more casts. There's one. Oh, look at that jump. Nice Slug-Go fish. I want to show you what I've done on that Slug-Go. Be still. I put a stinger hook on that thing. If you'll look how that caught him. A lot of times these fish are coming up and butting at this thing. And so what I've done is put a trailer, more or less a trailer hook, just like you would on a spinnerbait. I'll show you how I rigged that thing in a minute. Boy, look how it got him. Now that one I would have caught him anyway, but look how he took the big hooks on the outside and he's right up there by his eye. Didn't hurt him a bit. But we'll release this fish and then I'll show you how I've got this trailer hook. See how I've got that on there? Now watch how I rig that back into the Slug-Go. Just pull your hook back through. That fish pull that on through the bait. Get that back in there like it's supposed to be. You see I'm using my standard 5/0 wide gap hook, and then I've just taken and put in a small, that's a small 3/0 worm hook, and what I did, I opened that up with a pair of pliers and slipped it around the shank of that hook and then bent it back just a little bit. And a lot of times these fish will come up and hit at that Slug-Go and take it by the tail and you miss them. But if you put a little stinger hook on there like that, you're apt to catch them. And that, the way I've got that rig, it doesn't mess with the action of your bait. It's just free swinging on there and it doesn't hurt the bait at all. You know, something I just thought of, a lot of you viewers are probably tournament fishermen, and I find these baits, these soft plastic stick baits, are real interesting baits. They're good baits for locating fish, not necessarily even catching them, because there's a lot of times when these bass will come up at these things and don't hit them. And what you can do is you can take and fish them, and you can cover lots of water with them, and you can move the fish, and some of them you may catch and some of them you may not. And if they're biting them real good, you may want to bend the hook down so you don't catch every one of them. But at least the thing about it is it's pulling them up there so that you can see they're there. I'm getting ready to fish a tournament down in North Carolina in a couple of weeks, and I went down there and pre-practiced the other day, and I was catching them down there on a Slug-Go one morning just real good. And really, it was a cloudy kind of rainy morning, and the fishing was just real good. And I don't probably expect to find the fish up there on that Slug-Go when I go back, but I do at least know that there's a lot of quality fish in that area, and maybe they'll filter out off the points and I can catch them on something else out there on a Carolina rig or whatever it takes. But at least I found those fish with that bait, so it's a good bait for locating fish, besides the fact it's a good bait for catching them too. He come up to it and went back down. He's not going to take it. He just come up and looked and went back. Hello, baby. Now that is a nice floating worm bass. Come on around here. Boy, I mean, he come up and blasted it. Be still. That's the kind we've been looking for right there. Look how he got that floating worm. He's got that hook right in his tongue. Nice 3-pound bass. Boy, he really hit her on top. I'm just twitching that floater back and forth, just kind of letting it go under sometimes, and once in a while I'll let it come right up on top and dart back and forth to the sides using 10-pound test line, 6-inch chartreuse yellow floating worm, 2/0 hook. I'm going to release him back in here and let her grow up. I'm going to show you how to rig this floating plastic worm. Now, fishing these open water conditions like what we're doing here today, basically all I do is take about a 2/0 Gamakatsu or an owner hook. I like a light wire, real sharp hook for these things. Seems like they, you know, they don't sink the bait fast, and you get a good hookup ratio when you're getting your strikes. And what I'll do is take that hook and run it down, try to get it centered as well as you can, and run it right in there like this, right down into the blood sac. Bring it out, Slide that right on up there. And I like it back in the bait like that for a couple reasons. One is if the fish is hitting short, he'll take that and get a hold of it good. And it just seems to work the bait when you've got your line coming out and you've got that hook that far back. When you twitch it, it pops that head up and keeps that bait up near the surface. So that's the way I like to rig it. And I usually go ahead and throw that like it is there for a few times. And if you catch a fish or two and your worm starts sliding up and down on your hook, then's when I'll take a toothpick and stick right through the worm and through the eye of the hook just to peg it on there so it won't slide anymore. Now that's my favorite way to fish it in open water, open hook. You don't need a Texas rig when you're fishing open water if you're not going to hang up on anything. Now the other method, if I am fishing where there's heavy cover, I like to fish that screw lock rig, kind of like I showed you on the Slug-Go's. And what I'll do is just take your floating worm and I'll just take and just screw that thing on there. Just screw it right up on there. And then I'll take and put this through. A lot of times I like to run that hook of that point of that hook right on through the worm and bring it out like so, and then just barely hook the point back in. Now this particular one, you don't even have to do that. That's why they've got those little ridges on there to block that off. But if it's a worm that doesn't have that, then you have to just barely hook the point in. And see, you've got a pretty weedless bait right there. And when you set the hook, then that'll pop out there and hooky. As far as action is concerned on a floating or swimming worm, typically you want to keep your rod tip up fairly high, because a real key in having good hooking success and a good hookup ratio is once that fish takes the bait, you need to kind of drop your rod and let him turn with it and start down and then set the hook. So I work my bait with the rod tip fairly high, and I usually work it in short, quick little twitches, and sometimes I'll let it settle in between. The wind's got a big bow in my line here, so it's making it kind of tough. But I like to keep my rod tip high and just pop that thing a little bit and let it settle maybe, and pop it twice and let it settle. Just make it dart back and forth and then settle. And you kind of have to experiment with the speed of retrieve and see what they want the most. But really a couple of short, quick twitches will dart that bait one way and then turn it back the other way, and that seems to trigger an aggressive strike a lot of the time. I'm fishing this floating swimming worm in this small spawning area right here. It's just a gradual slope pea gravel chunk rock bank, a lot of gravel on it. And these are a small pocket here. These are the type places that these bass like to move in and build their beds. And they'll hold in an area like this for a month in the spring and during the pre-spawn, and then all through the spawn, and then a little while in the post-spawn before they start moving back out on the points. So if you look for these small, gravelly, flatter, gentle slopes, it's usually a good area to find the spawning fish. There. Oh! Boy, that was a nice fish. She come up there and sucked at it, and I tried to let her have it, but she just didn't get it in her mouth. That's another thing I can't stress enough of how critical it is to let that fish take that bait down and turn with it. And I'm the world's worst about getting excited and wanting to jerk when I see those fish coming up. But it is so critical to let them turn and start down with that bait and get turned away from you before you set the hook. Really important in getting a good hook set. If you're going to put together a selection of these floating worms, you need to have a few of the bubble gums, a few of the yellow or chartreuse models, some whites. The orange methylate color has been real hot the last couple years, and then I like to have a few dark colors too to get you by in a dark light situation. But if you just got 4 or 5 good colors of these things, you can usually go through them and find one that they'll hit. There's one under it. Watch him. Come on, come on. Look at that pretty bass on that pink bubblegum floating worm. Come here. Now that silly looking thing, that bubblegum worm, that's a good 1.5-pound fish. That bubblegum worm has been so hot for the last 3 or 4 years on this, and I don't know why, but there's just something about that color that just irritates these fish to death, and they can't stand it. They gotta bite it. One under it. Good one, good one. Get it, baby. 3.5 pounder. He's still there. He's not gonna hit it though. Always right under it. Get it, baby. Hello, baby. Now that's not the same fish. Can't be the same fish. I thought there was a 3-pounder under there, and look what I caught. You know what I did on that, and I was working it in, and I saw that fish under it, and I just stopped it, and I just let it free fall real slow, and he eased up there and got it. Sometimes you have to do that, kind of either stop it or maybe move it faster. You just got to experiment with it. That isn't the same fish I was looking at. Can't be. Ooh, baby, come on back. Got him. Come right back and got her again. It's we've got just a little bit of a cloud come over the sun there. Anytime you can have something like that, it can really make a difference in the strike ratio. Boy, just a little old bit of a cloud cover coming over has made a difference there, and I got a bite. Boy, I tell you what, one thing about this type bait, it's a great follow-up bait. When you're fishing a buzz bait or a zero spook, some kind of a topwater or maybe a spinner bait and burn it across the surface real fast, and if you get a big fish to come up there and miss that bait, just lay that thing down real quick, reach down and pick up your soft plastic stick bait and drop it right back in there and work it across where he was real slow. And man, there's a lot of times those big ones will come right back up and get that thing. You know, people have been doing that for years with like a plastic worm. They'd have it laying there ready. But this bait is a real compliment to a fast-moving buzz bait or a topwater, something noisy. There he is. Another one on the floating lizard. I wish your grandma would bite. You know, most of this show that we've been doing has been shot during pre-spawn and spawn situation. And really, these soft plastic stick baits are real good baits anytime your fish are in shallow water. They're not real good in the dead of hot summer because most of your fish are deep unless you're just in a lake where there isn't any deep water. But again in the fall, when they move back in for a while in the fall and start feeding real heavy, boy, I mean, sometimes you can't beat this type bait. And then even a lot of times in early winter, and I know at home on Table Rock, where we've got quite a bit of standing cover, we catch a lot of fish suspended around them on like Slug-Go type lures in the wintertime when they're suspended around those trees. A lot of times that's when you'd weight your bait and bring it down beside the tree and fish it real slow. So there's a lot of applications for this bait besides just in the spring. It's really, and I know one time last fall we got onto them down on a lake in South Carolina called Murray. And boy, I mean, it was a BASS Top 100 Pro-Am, and I did pretty well in a tournament myself, and a lot of the top stringers that were caught on floating worms down there, so it's not just a spring type pattern. It seems like when you're fishing these type lures early in the morning, it's nice to have a fairly glassy surface, you know, pretty slick on top with not much wind. And then as the day progresses and your sun gets up higher, it's always nice to have a little riffle on the water just to break up the clarity and kind of mask you from the fish and whatever, and it just camouflage, you know. So it's nice to have a little bit of surface wind there, but then you can have too much wind too. If it gets too hard to fish, you know where the wind's putting a big bow in your line. It's not to say the fish won't bite it sometimes if it's real windy, but this type lure, it's hard to feel it when you get a big bow in your line. It's hard to work it correctly. So really, there are some times when you can get too much wind too, but a little bit of wind like you can see on the water right here is nice. Put on a black and kind of silver floating lizard, threw it 2 times and got a bite on it. About that. I just make that thing kind of walk along the top like a zero spooker, just right under the surface, depending on the situation. It's a lot like fishing your other Slug-Go type lures or your floating worms, but sometimes this lizard is something that they will really hit. And it's a big bass bait. You catch a lot of big ones on that thing. Yes, oh yeah. They're liking that lizard this morning. Hello, little bass fish. Be still now. I'm working a little faster right now. It seems like they're pretty aggressive, and I'm popping that lizard right under the surface, just making its head dart back and forth, working it pretty quick. And boy, I mean, they are just coming up there and slamming that thing. That one about jerked the rod out of my hand a while ago. There's one right there. He slammed it like a freight train. That's on that floating lizard again. I've got a black one on with a little silver, and I'll show you how I rig that hook. I do it basically just like you do with the Slug-Go or any other soft plastic stick bait. I just use an offset hook. Now that's about a 4/0 because this lizard's not real heavy bodied, and it's just a standard, that's a VMC cone cut hook right there. And I just rig it practically the same way you would the others. And right now, fishing this open water, I leave the hook exposed. You don't need to have that hook buried. Now if you're fishing it through real heavy cover, again, you just bring the point back up like so, and you can fish that thing through anything like that. But I like to leave it open in open water, and you get a lot better hookup ratio. Here's the type of equipment I like to use when I'm fishing these soft plastic stick baits and the swimming worms and floating worms. Now, when I'm casting a Slug-Go type lure or any kind of a soft plastic stick bait, I prefer to use a good standard retrieve ratio reel. I don't like a fast retrieve because I feel like that takes up the line too fast, and I don't want to get my bait moving too fast with these type lures. I like a fairly light reel, something that's comfortable to use and something that's got a good drag on it. Personally, I use Abu Garcia products. I've used them for years and I feel real comfortable with them, but there's lots and lots of good reels on the market. As far as rods are concerned, I use several different types of rods, but my favorite rods is about a 6-foot medium heavy rod. And the reason I like that is because it has good tip action. You can work the bait and give it lots of action with that soft tip, but it also has lots of backbone from about 2/3 of the way down to set the hook when the bass takes it. So you've got a good tip action to work the bait. You've got good backbone from here down. I do occasionally use a flip and stick or a real heavy rod for this type fishing. The only time I do use those heavy rods is when I'm fishing in real heavy cover and something that you have to really put some pressure on a good fish when you get a hold of him. Like if you're fishing in real heavy grass of some type, or if you're fishing around real heavy wooded cover, then I will go to a 6.5 or even a 7-foot heavier rod and a lot heavier line. But for just most of my open water fishing, I of course fish on clear water, open lakes an awful lot, like the White River chain, and I use the medium heavy action rods, and I really get along well with them. Now on the swimming worms and floating worms, I use about a 6.5-foot spinning rod most of the time. These worms are pretty light and they're hard to cast on bait casting equipment. So I like to use a spinning rod, and I'll use a pretty good sized spinning reel that has a good spool, good wide spool here. The line comes off of it good and you can get good casts. And I use a medium heavy action rod on that too, something that's got a good quick tip so you can twitch it and pop it and make that bait dart, but it has good heavy solid backbone here to set the hook in when you get a good strike. So that's a type spinning rod and reel I use. I use just a standard retrieve ratio spinning reel. And as far as line's concerned, on the swimming and floating worms, I use a line, I like Trimax because it's relatively limp and it doesn't have a lot of stretch. And I use 10-pound test most of the time. Now I have gone lighter in real clear water situations, and sometimes if you're in real heavy cover, you've got to go heavier. But my favorite to use, because I can get a good hook set on a big bass with 10-pound and not break my line setting the hook. With lighter lines, sometimes I'll break the line setting the hook in them. So 10 is about my favorite on the floating worm. As far as the Slug-Go's concerned, I typically use, in open water situations, I like to use about 14-pound Trilene XT. I like to use green in clear water because I feel like those fish, if I can see the line, they can see it. So I typically use green line in clear water. And I like to use about 14-pound XT most of the time, unless I'm fishing the heavier cover or an extremely clear water situation. I might size down a couple of pound tests, but that's about my favorite. And I have used up to 25 or 30-pound test on a Slug-Go if you're fishing super heavy cover, you know, with real big fish. So it just kind of, you have to play the tackle to the condition, but this is my favorite type of equipment. You know, most of the fishing that we've done has been on a couple of lakes here that's pretty void of any aquatic vegetation, but I really like to fish soft plastic stick baits or floating plastic worms around aquatic vegetation. They're just killer lures in that situation. And what I like to do is follow a grass line along, and a lot of times you kind of got to determine whether the fish are up in the grass or whether they're off the edge. But a lot of times to do that, I'll start fishing along and I'll look for holes up in that grass, and I'll throw that lure up in there, and I'll throw past a hole, and I'll work that thing up to that hole. I'll twitch it up there and work it back and forth, and then when it gets up to that hole, then I may just hesitate it and kind of let it fall down in there and give it a couple of sharp twitches. And then if you don't get a strike, just bring it on up and work it on across the top of that grass. And when you get out to the edge of the grass line, then bring it right on out there and then let it drop again. Pop it a couple of times, let it hesitate it, and then work it on out. So that's the way you're going to determine if the fish is up in the grass holding somewhere or if he's out on the edge of it. And once you kind of determine where they're holding, then you can key in on that type of pattern and really get it going with your soft plastic stick bait. I'm moving back into a shallow pocket here. This is our last afternoon. It's really the first warm afternoon we've had since we came down here. It's been cold every day and windy, and we got a nice warm 75-degree afternoon now, and the water's starting to warm up. It's been pretty chilly down in the upper 50s and low 60s early. And as I was sneaking in here, I caught one right out there off that point. I saw 3 or 4 good fish laying up on the surface back in this pocket, and what's happening, I think, is the water's starting to warm and they're moving up back in here this afternoon. And I'm gonna slip up in here and see if I can get one of them to hit. There's one's got, there he is. Woo, look at here. Scrappy little devil. Come on up here. Came up and got that white floating worm right out here in this broad daylight and bright sun. I mean, he ate it too. Grow up. There's a fish moving right there. I think he's under my bait now. Get it, come on, get it. Oh, I missed him. There's one. Hello, baby. Oh, that's a nice one. Woo, looky here. Jump for us. I mean, he came up and got that floater. Come on in here. Now that's the kind we've been looking for here. Come here, Bessie. Isn't that a pretty fish? Look how he got that floating worm. I mean, he came up there and just ate it. I love it. I love to practice catch and release too. I'm gonna let that little jewel grow up and be twice that size in a year or two. Oh, yes. Folks, it's been great filming this show for you all. I really appreciate your patience with me. I love catching these fish on these baits. Look at the size of this one. I've really had fun doing this. I hope you've enjoyed this, and I hope you've picked up a few tips about how to catch some fish in your own fishing experiences. And one other thing I want you to remember, if you're catching beautiful bass like this, you want to practice catch and release so we can protect the resource for the future generations. Thank you very much.
We hope you've enjoyed this presentation as much as we have in bringing it to you. Our goal is to provide you with the most on-target outdoor videos available to the sportsman today. We would also like to take this opportunity to invite you to visit the Bass Pro Shops National Headquarters showroom in Springfield, Missouri. Outdoor World is a sportsman's showcase. 150,000 square feet of today's finest outdoor products for the serious sportsman and fun-loving outdoor family. And it's all set in an atmosphere you simply won't find anywhere else. With an indoor waterfall, huge fresh and saltwater aquariums, a full-size 2-story log cabin, and the largest collection of trophy game and fish mounts you'll find on display anywhere, plus much more. There's even a fresh seafood restaurant, snack bar, and barber shop to make your visit more enjoyable. The fisherman will find all of his old favorites along with the most up-to-date selection of modern high-tech tackle available at Outdoor World. In or out of season, you'll always find thousands of rods, reels, and aisle after aisle of today's most asked-for lures, filling the shelves of the Outdoor World fishing department. And we've even opened our White River Fly Shop to fulfill all the needs of the ardent fly fisherman. The Bass Pro Shops catalogs bring the greatest selection of top-quality outdoor products currently available right into your home, and as close as a phone call away. For our latest catalog, call 1-800-BASS-PRO. The catalog is free, and so is the phone call. We want to thank you for letting us help you have fun in the outdoors.